Hey everybody, it's Rob here at etrailer.com. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Roadmaster 12-volt outlet kit on our 2020 Silverado. Now, one of the reasons why you may want a 12-volt outlet kit is if you want to flat tow your Silverado. Because once you start doing some research, you'll find out real quickly that your Silverado is going to have the battery disconnected, or at least have the power cut off to flat tow it. And that's all fine and good, but if we have the power cut off, there's no way to get power to our braking system, especially if it's a portable system. The outlet kit's going to allow you to get that power even with the truck off. Right now, we have our truck with the battery disconnected, and you can see it's not getting any kind of power, the dome light's not on, and my ignition's not coming on. But if I get something that I can plug in, either a charger, some kind of an adapter, you can see we're still getting power there, and we can use our portable braking system even with the battery disconnected. Our 12-volt outlet kit is going to provide us 12 volts of power at up to 20 amps, so it should be great for most portable braking systems. Now, one thing I will say, a lot of people are having a little bit of problems with the bracket. You'll see it's got these little teeth or almost tabs that kind of stick out and grab the socket itself. You need to make sure that those tabs are pointing towards the opening of the 12-volt socket, and that's what prevents it from getting pushed in. You're not going to be able to feed it from the back. What you need to actually do is put the wires through the bracket so they come out the hole, and again, that's what holds it in place. Now, as far as the installation goes, it's extremely straightforward. We just need to find a spot to mount our outlet, wherever it would be convenient for us so we can still get access to, and then just run a few wires into the engine bay so we can connect it directly to the battery. Now, we chose to mount ours directly to the battery because we do have to disconnect the battery from our truck. It's pretty straightforward, but there are a few things that you will need in conjunction with this. Because it has to go to the engine bay, a few feet of extra wire, as well as some ring terminals will definitely help out. But just so you can have the confidence to do it at home, let's go and do the installation together, and we'll go through all the process of how we hooked everything up. To begin our installation, we want to find a spot that we're going to mount our 12-volt socket. Now, the kit is going to come with a bracket. Now, you don't have to use it, but we're going to be using ours. We're going to mount ours in the lower section of the dash. That way it's accessible, but it's not going to be in the way. So we're going to mount ours kind of on the center console area, just right here in the lower section of the dash. So it's going to kind of sit like this. So we're going to take the included self-tapping screws, and we're just going to line our bracket up how we want it to sit, and we're going to screw into the bottom of the dash here. Now, I do suggest that you can reach your hand in and you can see if there's anything back there, because we don't want to drill into anything, any electrical wires or any AC lines or anything else. So you want to double check what's back there before you start drilling. Grab a 3/8 nut driver, line up our bracket, and before you screw your bracket on, just to kind of give you an idea, the prongs are going to be pointing towards the opening of the 12-volt socket, so you want to make sure you mount it the correct way. You don't want to mount it like this, because then the socket's will be pointing backwards. So our socket should be pointing out like that. The wires are going to go through. I'll just take my self-tapping screw. We'll get one started. Leave it kind of loose for now. Get our second one in place, line it up how we like it, we can tighten it down. We'll just take our 12-volt socket, we're going to find the end of the wires, I'm going to pass both the wires through, pull all that slack out, and that's how our 12 volt's going to be sitting, just like that. There are two wires here, one with the spade terminal on it, and the fuse holder is going to be our power wire, and the other wire is going to be our ground wire. We need to hook these up, but since our truck has a battery disconnect on it, it's because we're going to be flat towing it, we're going to need to hook ours directly to the battery. Now, these wires are not long enough to reach the battery, so we are going to have to extend them. So The one thing you do want to pay very close attention to is in the instructions it does tell you not to extend the wire past the fuse holder. We want to keep this little bit right here. We don't have to use the spade terminal on it, but we don't want to add any extra length to the end of the fuse. If we need to lengthen it out, we want to do it behind the fuse here. So I'm going to cut both wires and we're going to extend them out, but just again, make sure it's behind the fuse. So just cut our wire and strip back the end of it. I'm going to use a heat shrink butt connector because it is going to help protect that wire a little bit better. Now these are not going to come with the kit and neither is wire, but you can pick both of those up here. And really how much wire you need is going to depend on where you mount your plug. But I would say 10 feet would be more than enough because it just has to go from here to the engine bay and meet up with the battery. Get our butt connector in place. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the ground. Just going to cut that wire. And I made it a little bit longer, that way I can kind of keep track of what's what. We can take our length of wire that we're going to use to extend it, we'll strip it back, and then we're just going to put it into the other end of the butt connector. And I'm actually going to use two different color wires, so it does make it a little bit easier to keep track of which one's the power and which one is the negative. I'm going to use a black wire for my power wire, and I'm going to use a white wire for my ground. You can use whatever color wire you want for your extension, just make sure you hook up the positive to the positive and the negative to the negative because we don't need to cross those circuits. Now I'm going to use a heat gun to shrink down my butt connectors, but if you're using an open flame like a torch or a lighter, you're going to be extremely careful not to burn or char the connectors or the wires themselves. So now we need to get these wires to the outside. Typically the easiest way is to use an existing grommet that's on the firewall, and there is one that we've used before to run some other wires for our flat toe setup. However, we have found that it's a little bit harder to reach from the inside and it's easier to reach from the engine compartment. So let's move out there and we'll show you how we're going to get the wires out to the engine bay. So we're over here on the driver's side of the firewall, and here you can see our main harness coming out of the cabin. And you can also see there's a small hole just to the passenger side of where our main harness is coming out of that grommet. And there's actually a little piece that sticks out, a little round piece that sticks out. If you cut that off, there's actually a hole that goes all the way through. And what we did is we took an airline tube and I fed it through the outside until I could get access to it from the inside, and then used everything to pull that through. So I'll take my airline tube, I'm going to put it into that grommet, push it through until we can get it to reach on the other side. Now you may have a little bit easier of a time because if you haven't used this grommet yet, it'll be open and there won't be any wires in there. But you do want to be extremely careful if you do have to cut anything or cut the grommet, because we don't want to damage any of the wires on the inside. We're going to get this airline tube into the passenger compartment and attach it to the extensions we made. And once you get your airline tube through, I will let you know, it should come out, most likely, if you're using an airline tube or something that kind of curls up. It will be a little bit towards the center console, but it's going to be about midway up the firewall. You may need to reach underneath the dash, kind of look for it. So I suggest using something brightly colored so it's easy to find, easy to grab. But then we'll just take our two wires that we extended out. Let's take some tape. I'm going to tape it to my airline tube. You can also use a coat hanger, really pretty much about anything that can make it through that grommet that'll keep a structure to it once you start pushing on it. We're going to tape it to here, move back out to the engine bay, and start pulling everything through. And once you get it into the engine bay, you want to pull as much of that slack through and get it out as you can. And if you need to, it's not a bad idea to double check on the inside, make sure it didn't get wadded up underneath the dash and didn't get caught on anything. So we need to get our wires over to the passenger side where our battery is. So what I like to do to kind of help keep the wires protected and also hide them a little bit is I'm going to take these push pins up on this plastic cowl here, and I'm going to tuck my wires behind the push pins and then put them back in. It's exactly what I did with this wire here, because there's really not anything to zip tie these wires to, so it just makes a really easy spot to tuck away and kind of hide them. You can take a flat blade screwdriver or a trim panel tool. There's a little notch on these push pins. You want to come underneath the center there. You're going to lift up, and then I'll unlock it. Then we can come underneath the base and pull the rest of it out. I'm just going to work my way across, taking all these out until I can get that wire to fit underneath. I will let you know it's a little bit tight to kind of pull up on here. So you kind of just pull up and just start working that wire back, but you do want it to be behind the push pin, because really if it's in front of it, it's not going to do a whole lot. And if you have a plastic trim panel tool, you can use that to kind of push the wire in. Shouldn't have to worry about damaging it if it is plastic. Or you can just push it in with your fingers like I'm doing here. So then we have our wires over on the battery side. We'll go ahead and remove the cover on our battery here. Just press in on the tabs and it'll lift right off. Now again, we have a battery disconnect that's on our truck because we're going to be flat towing it, and it does require the battery to be disconnected. So in order for us to get 12-volt power to that socket, it needs to be hooked directly to the battery post. So we'll take our power wire, we're going to strip back the end of it. We'll get another one of the butt connectors and clip it onto the end of the wire. We want to grab that fuse holder that we had earlier. We're going to strip back the end of it so that we can attach it back to the wire. So strip a little bit, and we'll take that end and crimp it directly into that butt connector. And we'll shrink it down just like we did with the other ones. Now we can't hook our spade terminal up to the battery post, so I'm going to cut that off and replace it with a ring terminal. Now this ring terminal is not going to come with your kit, because typically you would use the spade terminal to connect it to the fuse tap that comes in your kit. But again, because we have to go directly to the battery, I'm going to replace it with a ring terminal. And you can find these here at etrailer.com. So just cut the spade terminal off, strip back a little bit of the insulation, and then crimp our ring terminal right onto the wire. Now we can grab a 13mm socket, and we're going to remove the nut that's on the battery post. And slide our ring terminal over, just kind of tuck the wire back out of the way. So the ring terminal sits right over the stud, and we can replace that nut. And our fuse holder here, it should be able to sit right here in the box, just kind of in this channel along with our other cable that's in this channel. Hopefully we won't have to do any kind of trimming, and we should be able to get the cover back on. But now we can bring our attention to the white wire. Now this is going to go directly to the battery negative so we can get a good ground. So we can measure out about how much wire we need. I always like to give myself a little bit of extra. Cut the excess off, strip back the end of it, and you can either use a separate ring terminal, or you can use a butt connector and the piece that you cut off earlier. It's really up to you, whatever's easier for you, especially if you have more ring terminals laying around. You don't have to use a butt connector or use the one that you cut off earlier. You can just put a fresh ring terminal on there. And I'm going to use the new ring terminal because it is one less connection point instead of using a butt connector, and it's just easier for me to do it that way. We'll crimp it in place, and for our ground, we're going to need a 10mm socket so we can remove the nut on top. Now I will say you want to be extremely careful, especially with the ground, because it's kind of tucked in the back here and it's very easy to lose this nut and you really don't want to. So just make sure you hold on to it. Take our ring terminal, slide it over the ground stud, and then carefully replace that nut, get it started. And then we can tighten it back down. And now that we know that our cover fits, we can move back into the cabin and make sure that the circuits work properly and we can test the outlet. So we got a 12-volt adapter here that we can test our plug with. But I have my battery disconnect in the off position. You can see that we have no power going to our truck, which also means that we should have no power going to our 12-volt outlet from the factory here. You can see I don't have any lights on there, it's not coming on. But if I take it and I put it into my 12-volt kit that we installed, you can see that the light comes on and it's actually charging it. And if I hold the button on there, it's even turning on the flashlight. So now we have a 12-volt outlet even when all the power is cut off to our truck. Now would be a really good time to clean up any of your wires and just make an overall nice looking install. But once you have that done, that'll finish up your installation and your look at the Roadmaster 12-volt outlet kit on our 2020 Chevrolet Silverado.